Hello. Hello. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir. We can hear you, sir.
Okay.
Good evening, everyone. Can you hear my voice? Am I audible?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, you're perfectly audible. Are the speakers in?
Good evening, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes. You are heard, Jitendra. Jitendra, is the first speaker already in?
No, sir. Sir, the first speaker has joined.
Thank you very much.
হ্যাঁ না এখন তো সবাই ভয় লাগে বিরক্ত করে পাঠিয়ে দিল দেখি কি হয়েছে টাকা পাকা ঝেড়ে হয়ে গেল
Can you hear me, please?
Yeah, we can hear you, General.
Thank you.
Jitendra would start in just 2-3 minutes now. Jitendra, can you hear me? We'll start in 1 or 2 minutes now. Mr. Mukherjee has already joined. So we will begin at 6:05. Okay, and then we'll see what happens. And when we reach around 470-80, if we do, then take a screenshot of the number because the people will leave, you know. Okay, and you unmute yourself so that I can speak to you if needed. Right?
Good evening, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
I can hear you.
Okay. So thank you, everyone, for coming. We'll wait for next 5 minutes before we start the national webinar. So we'll just give 5 more minutes for the few participants who are waiting in that Zoom admit link. So we'll just wait for 5 minutes and then we'll start with the process. Thank you, everyone.
have Professor Kondapalli and Shubir come?
Professor Kundapalli will join at 6:15, sir, because he is in a webinar and he will join at 6:15.
Okay.
And Shubir also will come as it progresses, because you are speaking first. You are the inaugural speaker, sir. Can you please activate your chat box? There are certain kind of people who might want to ask some question directly.
It's open.
Thank you. Jitendra, we will begin now. Okay.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
So you begin.
So, good evening, everyone. I welcome all of you to this particular national webinar on the India-China issue. So, I will first be thanking all the deans of schools for taking time and joining this particular session. I will thank my Dean of School of Liberal Arts and Culture Study, Professor Mrityunjay Chatterjee. And there are certain senior faculties which need mentioning here, Professor Trideep Chakraborty, Professor Jyoti Gupta, Professor Moitri Bardhan Roy, Professor Ruby Sain, and all to my department colleagues, participants from both different universities across India and from abroad, and of course, my dear students. It is a proud privilege for me to welcome you all to this national webinar entitled India-China Border Issues, the Road Ahead. Everybody is very much well acquainted about the issue. China was in the news for a different reason during the COVID, and now it is in the news for a different reason. So this webinar is an attempt to understand the current scenario which India is facing, or the India-China is facing in the northern territories of India. Without a further ado, I would like to introduce Professor Mrityunjay Chatterjee, who is the Dean of School of Liberal Arts and Culture Studies, and he's also the moderator of today's event, to carry forward from here. So once again, I welcome everyone to this national webinar. Thank you. Over to you, sir.
Yeah. Thank you, Jitendra. Thank you, everyone who worked for it. We had a huge response from all over India and some neighboring countries. We already see 258 people have already joined. Some we could not accommodate. They are on Facebook and YouTube as well. India and China have been neighbors for ages, and there has been several kind of interactions between the two giants in Asia, and there has been pleasantry and unpleasantry, but in the last around 4 decades there has not been a gunshot fired on either side, but there has been skirmishes, there has been border clashes. In 1962 we had a war, though we had a treaty in 1952, but this is a situation which all the kind of experts, we are very lucky that we have had the best of the experts from across the country who have joined today. General John Mukherjee needs no introduction. He would speak first. We have giants like Srikant Kondapalli, Professor Srikant Kondapalli from JNU. We have another giant in the form of Mr. Subir Bhowmik, who has really covered this region for BBC for a long time, and he's an expert on different issues and military issues. We also have Sriparna Pathak and Professor Ritusha Tiwari, who are both from the Institute of Chinese Studies and are at Jindal School and Delhi University. to set the ball rolling, I would, without much ado, because today there are so many experts that for me to speak on the ties between India and China would be too little or trifling. So I would invite straight away General John Mukherjee, who would now be introduced to the audience by Professor Madhurima Dasgupta, who is the HOD of the Sociology Department of School of Liberal Arts and Culture Studies at Amherst University. Over to you, Madhurima.
Thank you so much, sir, for such introduction. I would like to welcome the first guest speaker of today's national webinar, Lieutenant General John Ranjan Mukherjee, PVSM, AVSM, VSM, which is awarded to recognize distinguished service of a high order to all ranks of Indian Armed Forces. He is the General Officer commanding of 15 Corps in Jammu and Kashmir and is reputed to be among the finest officers in the Indian Army. He is also the former Chief of Staff, Eastern Command. So I would like to request our first guest speaker, Lieutenant Gen John Mukherjee, sir, to kindly enlighten all of us.
Before General begins, I would like to say that we would allot around 12 to 15 minutes for each speakers, then go into interaction and take questions. All the audience are requested to put their question on chat boxes, and those questions which would be in common we'll take together. Otherwise, we will try to answer your question. Over to you, General.
Good evening to you, ladies and gentlemen, Professor Chatterjee, Professor Jitendra. Very kind of you to invite me, and I am deeply honored. I don't normally come on TV or Facebook because I try and avoid it. But on Shubir's insistence, I decided I would break silence today. I would not be speaking specifically on Ladakh. I will speak on Indo-China relations from the military point of view and cover the entire border from Ladakh to Arunachal Pradesh and issues related thereto. I have a lot of ground to cover. So I'm going to speak very quickly and cover whatever issues there are as rapidly as possible. The first thing one must understand is from a military point of view, when one is looking at Indo-China relations, one needs to take a detailed look at geopolitics and the geostrategy related to the two countries. There are a few theorists on this subject. The first is Robert Kaplan, who gives in detail aspects of geography and its dictates towards politics and strategy, wherein he enunciates the heartland and the rimland theories. And the heartland of the world being the general area of the Central Asian republics and Western China. India forms part of the rimland, as also the eastern seaboard of China. To have military power, you must be able to control both the heartland and the rimland. China at the moment has access to both. India has access, total access to the rimland. I won't talk further about Kaplan. I'll now jump straight on to the next theorist, who is a gentleman called Nicholas J. Spikeman, who enunciates the rimland theory further. And he talks about countries from temperate climates and access to the sea dominate the heartland in a much more effective manner. He therefore forecasts a very strong China. Then you come on to Samuel Huntington, very famous for his enunciation of the clash of civilizations. And one of the enunciations, besides Muslims versus the rest, is also the brown versus the yellow. Or in other words, the brown man versus the yellow man. The fourth one you do have is Halford Mackinder, who enunciates the heartland theory in detail and talks about the heartland being the geographical pivot of history. And whoever controls the heartland rules the world, which is the background to USSR trying to control the entire area of the Central Asian republics. Then you have Alfred Thayer Mahan, who talks about the Indian and Pacific Oceans. He says, whoever controls these two oceans holds the pivot and will control power. As far as he is concerned, the heartland and rimland become relatively less important than having tremendous sea power and controlling these oceans. Then you have a gentleman called Paul Bracken, who talks about the crisis of space, globalization, and therefore says confrontation between nations is inevitable, particularly when they have to compete with each other for both globalization and space. As far as China is concerned, it has the scope to look westward into the vacuum of the Central Asian republics, the Middle East, and Afghanistan. Afghanistan is acknowledged to be part of the heartland, and particularly as it looks further in depth into Russia and neighboring countries. And therefore, China desires to control Afghanistan. As far as China further is concerned, to the north it has Mongolia and Siberia, and it is already trying to change the demography of these two regions and take control of it. In Southeast Asia, and it is blocked by India, which into the Indian Ocean, thereby blocking its sea routes to access oil from the Middle East. You also have the island chains to the east of China, linking on to Japan, Philippines, and Taiwan, blocking China's access further westwards. So China feels restrained by these, and therefore its priorities are to remove these restraints. That includes India and includes the island chain and anything is blocking its way into the heartland. India, in turn, has insecure frontiers, part of itself created in the form of Nepal, Bhutan, Tibet, Myanmar, Sri Lanka. India, according to Kaplan, is also politically extremely divided due to its demography and river basins and its forests and mountains. Now I'll come on to the issue proper. India has a border with China of a little over 4,000 kilometers. The Chinese area is different because there are different claims from both sides. China has either illegally seized or claimed areas right since 1954, which amount to 1,40,000 square kilometers. That includes Aksai Chin and other areas, which I'll come on to a little later. Now, in 1911, the British Tibetans, as primary and witnessed by China, since China was not in power in Tibet, signed the Simla Agreement, wherein the line along the ridge
I
of
think
the
your audio
Himalayas.
has a problem, General.
Can you hear me now? Can you hear me now?
Can you hear me, General?
I can hear you very clearly.
Yes, sir, we can hear you. We can hear you.
So the McMahon line runs along the ridge line, all along from the Nepal border, running along the mountains to the north of Arunachal, the Himalayas, the ridge line, and ending on the junction with Burma. Prior to the 1962 war, the reasons why it started were border disputes based on the Dalai Lama escaping Tibet, the Tibetan clampdown, and fleeing to India. The Chinese marched into Tibet and thereafter claimed to be the rulers of Tibet and claimed that whichever areas were controlled by Tibet were theirs, and boundaries would henceforth be there. And they therefore claimed the following areas: the whole of Ladakh. I repeat, the whole of Ladakh. The disputed area on the UP-Tibet border sector in Barahoti. The whole of Sikkim initially, which later on got modified to just the Fingers area in North Sikkim. The tri-junction between, in the area of Lipu Lake Pass, which they have prompted Nepal to now raise and demanded that Nepal declare it its territory. So the eastern tri-junction of Nepal and India and Tibet, as also the western tri-junction. Then as far as Bhutan is concerned, again the eastern and western tri-junctions, the area of Dolam Plateau, it's pronounced Dolam, though many people say Doklam, in western Bhutan, the plateau, and the entire area up to Sanchenlobba and Halakyula ridgelines. In central Bhutan, a patch near the border. In eastern Bhutan, again areas adjacent to the tri-junction with Arunachal and Tibet. They claim the whole of Arunachal, but the specific claims in Arunachal were Tawang, the entire Tawang sector, almost up to the plains, In the Subansiri Valley, two places called Asafila and Longju. In the Siang sector, the Bhutia-speaking areas. In the Dibang Valley, fishtails. In the Lohit sector, Walong and the Indo-Myanmar Tibet Tri-Junction. Now, all the tri-junctions claimed were with a view to outflank Indian defenses. Now, I'll leave the claimed areas for the moment. When you had the 62 war, just prior to it in 1959, Zhou Enlai wrote a letter to Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru enunciating areas of actual control. And that was the LSE, and the LSE is related only technically to Ladakh. So he specified areas to be under Chinese control in Ladakh. That became known as the line of actual control. That includes the Galwan Valley, right since 1959. It includes other areas also, including Aksai Chin and all. So I'll leave that for the moment. In the eastern sector, the Tawang Belt was as it is claimed, and the specific areas that I just explained to you. When the 62 war took place, the Chinese came up to their specific claimed lines, which included the LSE in Ladakh, and all the way almost up to the foothills in Tawang sector and other specific claimed areas in Arunachal. They also entered the Barahoti plains. But after the October 62 operations, they pulled back just prior to winter. Many years after they pulled back, as a result of the Colombo Agreement in 1963, the Indian Army was ordered to move forward by the Indian government, and they went up to a particular area. In Ladakh, it was well short of the claimed line of the LSE, and in Arunachal, it was almost 100 kilometers south of the Chinese claimed areas in many places. In 86, 87, during Operation Checkerboard, when the Chinese were up to mischief all over, it is at that stage that the Indian Army moved forward to the line of actual control in Ladakh, the Chinese line of actual control, and in certain areas slightly ahead of it, and in Arunachal, right up to the McMahon line. In UP-Tibet border sector, up to the boundary of the Barahoti Plain. That was objected to by the Chinese, and they also moved forward simultaneously. And their deployment was largely what it was before the current fiascos have taken place. After that, we've had a series of agreements. The 1993 Border Peace and Tranquility Accord, the 2005 agreement between Manmohan Singh and the Chinese president, the 2009 agreement, and the 2016 agreement at Wuhan. Now, what are the contentious issues? I'm going to speed up now because I think I've just got a few minutes left. As far as India was concerned, what are the contentious issues between India and China? 1962 was not due to a border dispute. It was to teach India a lesson for supporting the Dalai Lama, also trying to be above China in the hierarchy of the world, rivalry in the Politburo, and strife in China, also to divert attention because of the US preoccupation with Cuba. They also had no love lost for Pandit Nehru. Then frequent incursions. 1967 particularly, where India gave them a bloody nose in Sikkim. 1986-87, where they were again given a bloody nose in Arunachal at Wangdung.
Start with you, Devachina. Why is some host controlling you?
Beg your pardon?
Sir, you have another 5 minutes.
Okay. I won't take long now. Rest I'll take on in question answer. Dolam Plateau incident, where again they got blocked, and in Tooting and in Siang region of Arunachal Pradesh. Then war hysteria and modernization of the PLA. China's Middle Kingdom attitude and economic rise and looking down on India. And they do look down on us quite a bit. The border dispute and the offensive infrastructure that China has built up in Tibet to launch military actions. An example of the infrastructure is how quickly they have built up opposite Ladakh in the last 2 months. Then China's total support to Pakistan regarding the nuclear issue, as also supplying them weapons and supporting them in all respects. Blocking India's entry into the Security Council, blocking India's entry into the nuclear suppliers group, colluding with Pakistan on J&K and nuclear proliferation. Then the China-Pakistan economic corridor from Xinjiang going straight on to Gwadar through Karakoram Pass, instigating the smaller neighbors to contain China. The string of pearls at Chokpu in Myanmar, Sri Lanka, Maldives, Sudan, Gwadar, alienating Sri Lanka and Nepal, and trying to alienate Bhutan and Myanmar. Then the Masood Azhar case, wherein they have supported him totally and blocked his being outlawed. Then a fear of India regarding the possibility of their damming and diverting the Brahmaputra waters. Then a huge trade deficit and flooding India with Chinese goods, particularly the Northeast region. As far as China is concerned, their grievances against India are Indian sanctuary to the Dalai Lama, interference in Tibetan affairs, the border dispute, India's causing up to USA, Japan, Australia, and Vietnam, their arch enemies, and the South China Sea, India intruding into that and supporting them on that issue. Not bowing down to China. Then, of course, India not supporting the Belt and Road Initiative of China or the CPEC. The Siang sector incident, a very poor opinion of Indian democracy, then blaming China for COVID-19 and its spread along with the rest of the world, trying to take away industry from China, trying to change the status of Kashmir, thereby endangering the CPEC through Article 370 and threatening to recapture POK, declaring Ladakh a union territory, thereby threatening the CPEC, collusion with Pakistan to link up with Gilgit and securing the CPEC. Lastly, the threat of India through the Indian Ocean. A quick look at my views related to the way forward. You can't choose your neighbors. No country can choose their neighbors. You're saddled with them. Therefore, you must try and resolve differences, politically, diplomatically. You must have a rational foreign policy which is non-antagonistic. You must evolve an economic partnership and arrive at a border settlement through give and take. In spite of being a soldier, I do not advise war. It is never advisable. I am deeply honored that you heard me out patiently. And the last point I have to say, as far as China is concerned, India must not align with the US bloc. If it does, you are arch enemy number one. Thank you very much.
Thank you, General. There were certain kind of points that we can really take home, especially the military advice that he has given to us on China. Aligning with US would really put us in the quandary, but the diplomatic ties and economic ties are something that the new world economy would demand. Even a small country, neighbor like Nepal sometimes is aligning with China to talk, eyeing straight at us. That there has been several kind of things that technically they are superior, but then Indian Army and the entire thing has changed since 1962. So it could be a different kind of situation. We have several kind of questions for you, sir, but we will take it later on. We'll move on to the next speaker, Professor Suparna Pathak, who would be introduced to the audience by Professor Mrunal Patnekar. Over to you, Mrunal.
Hello.
Mrunal, are you there? Yeah.
Yeah. It gives me great pleasure to introduce Dr. Shriparna Pathak. She is the Assistant Dean in the Jindal School of International Affairs. She was formerly a visiting faculty at the Center for Southeast Asian Studies, Guwahati University. Prior to this, she has been an assistant professor at the Assam Don Bosco University, prior to which she was a consultant at the Policy Planning and Research Division at the Ministry of External Affairs, New Delhi. She is also a fellow at the South Asia Democratic Forum in Brussels, Belgium. Dr. Shriparna Pathak was awarded a doctorate degree from the Center for East Asian Studies, Jawaharlal Nehru University back in 2015. She has worked with the Observer Research Foundation in Kolkata and New Delhi, respectively, the UNICEF India and Center for Armed Forces Historical Research, New Delhi. She has also been a journalist at the Indian Express, New Delhi, and the Avenue Mail, Jharkhand, respectively. With this, I hand over the reins to Shriparna Pathak. Thank you.
Thank you so much for the wonderful. Thank you so much for the wonderful introduction. I'm also immensely thankful to Professor Chatterjee and to Professor Nayak for having me here. Today, I am going to.
Excuse me, ma'am. Can you switch on your video, please?
Is it? Am I visible? I can see myself.
No, you are.
Yeah, you are visible. Absolutely.
I'm visible.
Okay, fine. Thank you.
Okay. So today, the topic of my presentation or my talk is China's domestic and the India-China military conflict of 2020 And what I shall try to do is I will try to bring out the domestic considerations, which is driving China to be extremely aggressive at the borders with India. In this COVID-19 situation, in this COVID-19 world order that we find ourselves in, China is being seen as responsible for the global pandemic. At the same time, there's this idea that it could emerge as a possible hegemon. It could emerge as the leader of the international system, replacing the United States. And this idea is gaining increasing traction in the CCP, the Communist Party, the Chinese Communist Party. So, in order to portray itself as the leader of the current international system, China is undertaking a lot of actions. And these actions are a blend of military, civil, and diplomatic instruments. There definitely is a lot of aggression from the Chinese side in foreign policy currently. And this aggression is seen not just in military terms, it's also seen in diplomatic terms, as we see China's wolf warrior diplomacy, wherein, to put its narrative out there, Chinese diplomats are adopting increasingly aggressive stances in line with Xi Jinping's directive to them to have a very fighting spirit in international relations. This was reiterated by Hua Chunying also last year, wherein she had lamented that Chinese diplomats do not have a fighting spirit. So currently in this COVID-19 situation, we see increasing aggression, even from diplomats. And diplomats are different from, they're not supposed to be aggressive to say the very least. In terms of military aggression, we see the fact that China escalated its standoffs with Vietnam and Malaysia in the South China Sea. This has happened in April and May this year. There are nighttime drills in the Taiwan Straits as well. And there has been the premeditated killing of 20 Indian soldiers at the India-China borders. All of this needs to be seen in the backdrop of the COVID-19. Why? Why should we see it in the backdrop of the COVID-19? If we look at the domestic repercussions which the COVID-19 has had, in terms of public health, there have been about 500 deaths officially. That's what the official Chinese statistics say. However, this needs to be taken with a little bit of a pinch of salt, because there were 21 million mobile phone subscriptions which dropped in January and February, pointing to the fact that the death toll has been much higher than what has been reported by the Chinese government. In addition to this, currently, Beijing is seeing the second round of COVID-19 in Beijing. This is what the state of public health is. When we look at the economic repercussions, Chinese economic growth rate has dropped by 6.8% year on year in the first quarter of 2020. Their growth rate is at a negative of 3%. Their investment shows a minus 10% growth year on year, and 600 million Chinese people are not well off. Urban unemployment, and this is just urban unemployment, was at 6% in April. There are immense difficulties as well in absorbing migrant laborers in the new and wary job market. As compared to India, which had a massive migrant crisis, for China, when the COVID-19 first happened, migrant laborers had either gone back home or were in the process of going back home, because the lunar or the spring festival was around the corner. But now that China is trying to reopen its economy, production is being attempted to be stepped up. The Chinese economy is trying to get back on track. These migrant laborers are finding it increasingly difficult to go back to their places of work because of the fear of a second wave of COVID-19. Also, because the job market, the economy as a whole has undergone a lot of changes, is very fragile. So it is reluctant to get these people back into the job market. The conditions which exist right now are in complete juxtaposition to what was envisaged by Xi Jinping in 2012 as part of his China dream, or the Chungguomeng, or the Chinese dream. So in 2012, Xi Jinping had talked about the China dream, and according to him, the China dream consists of three important components. One is a powerful and rich state, or the Guoqia Fuqiang in Chinese. There also was to be a renewal of the nation, or the Minzu Fuxing. And the third important tenet of the China dream was the happiness of the people, right? This was what he said in 2012. The conditions which exist today are completely in opposition to what he had envisaged in 2012. So now, how does China show itself as a powerful and rich country, or indicate a renewal of the nation in the current circumstances? To answer this question, let's take a quick detour to 1961. Just 1 year before the second five-year plan ended, it was clear to Mao Zedong that his policies of the Great Leap Forward were a catastrophic failure. Between 35 to 45 million Chinese people had died because of the Great Leap Forward. It caused a famine instead of the imagined rapid industrialization. So for Mao Zedong at that time, the best way to regain power and legitimacy was by unifying the nation, especially the armed forces against an outside enemy. That outside enemy was found in India, which was accused of a forward movement at the border. Now, 2020 is very similar to that, right? China in 1962 had accused India of a forward movement. In 2020, China accused India of building roads beyond its own borders. Whereas the fact remains that the Galwan area was traditionally part of the Kashmir princely state, and at no point in history, China ever had control over it. In fact, Galwan does not have a Chinese term. It does not have a Chinese name. A place does not have a Chinese name only when it did not belong to that particular state. So if you do a little quick Google search, just for information, you will see that the Chinese term, the Chinese name for Galwan is Chia Ke Fang, which is a direct transliteration of Galwan, right? There's no Chinese name for it. After laying down extensive infrastructure in the form of roads, railways, and fiber networks, in addition to deploying military forces, China now has an issue with India doing the same on the Indian side. The conditions today are very similar to 1961. Why? You know, when the COVID-19 first started spreading its tentacles in Wuhan, Dr. Li Wenliang, as far back as November 17th, 2019, he had sounded the warning bell in Wuhan when he found the strain of a virus which was very similar to the severe acute respiratory syndrome of 2002. What happened to him? Well, he was questioned, he was reprimanded, and finally in February this year, he succumbed to COVID-19. So after his death, he's become some sort of a national hero in China. And the Chinese people, the ordinary Chinese people, are extremely angry with the way in which Dr. Li Wenliang and his attempt to sound the alarm bell was dealt with, right? There are a lot of domestic pressures on Xi Jinping. There's a second round of COVID-19 in Beijing. All of this means that the attention of the domestic audience has to be deflected yet again. And the nation has to be reunified against an outside enemy. To assuage domestic anger, India has time and again been used as an outward enemy. It has been used as an outward enemy because it's seen as a weaker foe by the CCP. You know, even before 1962 happened, there were several low-level conflicts which were taking place between India and China, even as far back as 1959. There was a meeting between the then Soviet Union's Premier Nikita Khrushchev and Chinese leaders, including Mao Zedong and Chinese Premier and Foreign Minister Zhou Enlai. This happened on October 2nd, 1959. So Khrushchev asked the Chinese side about why Indians were killed on the border, to which Mao Zedong replied that India attacked first and fired for 12 hours, to which Khrushchev said that no Chinese has been killed, even if it was to be believed that India attacked first. The transcript of this conversation is available in the public domain. It has been made public by the Woodrow Wilson Institute Center for Scholars. You can just Google it. So in 2020, the question again arises, question which Khrushchev had asked. Even if one is to believe the Chinese side that India violated Chinese sovereignty, India should have had the first mover advantage. Why was it that Indian soldiers were martyred? China has not released official numbers of deaths or casualties from its side. 2021, next year, is supposed to be a very important year. It's very important because it is to be an important tenet of Xi Jinping's China dream, or the Chungwoma. By 2021, China had envisaged that it will establish a moderately prosperous society, or Xiaokang Shui, as China had hoped that it will wipe out absolute poverty by 2021. This relates directly to the third tenet of the Chinese dream, which I had just mentioned in one of the, just some time ago. It relates to people's happiness, right? To fulfill the Chinese dream, Xi Jinping had inherited two lofty economic targets from the previous leadership. The first centennial goal, as stated by Xi Jinping, was the building of a moderately prosperous society by wiping out poverty by the year 2021. So by 2021, China is to have 0 people affected by absolute poverty, right? This coincides with the 100th anniversary of the founding of the CCP. But how far are we on that goal? If you look at any of the indices which relates to the happiness of the people, be it that of poverty, be it that of inequality, be it that of growth, the goal is far from realization. According to statistics from the office of Liu Yongfu, who's the director of State Council Leading Group Office of Poverty Alleviation in Beijing. 6,84,000 people fell back into poverty in 2016. 2,08,000 people fell back into poverty in 2017, and 58,000 fell back into poverty in 2018. And this is up to 2018. This is not even in the COVID-19 era, right? So the goal of poverty elimination is far away from realization. Inequality is a chronic problem in China. It's interprovince income inequality. It's intrapersonal income inequality. Inequality is just chronic in China. Growth has not benefited all the sections of the society equally. China has moved from being a moderately unequal society in 1990 to being one of the world's most unequal countries. There's a huge gap between the income share, which is held by the top 10% of the Chinese population, and the income share held by the lowest 40% of China's population. According to statistics, again, till May 2020, 80 million Chinese are already out of work. 9 million more are going to be competing for jobs. So this just means that the establishment of a Xiaokang Shehui or a moderately prosperous society is far from completion. So what does China do in such a scenario? Attention deflection. Attention deflection, the way it did in 1962, whipping up nationalistic sentiment against an enemy at the border, displaying to its domestic audience the might of the PLA or the strength of the CCP, and trying to wipe out from public memory the grave realities of inequality, unemployment, inflation, and poverty. What does this mean for India? India is in it for the long haul, since none of China's domestic wars are going to disappear anytime soon. And attention deflection.
Ma'am, another 3 minutes, please.
Right, I'm on the last slide. So in addition, what does India do to address this situation? In addition to military rebuttal, India also needs to explore economic and diplomatic actions, which range from cutting the umbilical cord with Chinese products in the most important segments, like active pharmaceutical ingredients, the APIs. Currently, we import 70% of our APIs from China. Now, at a time when India is being lauded as being the pharmacy of the world, we are importing about 70% of these APIs, which go into medicine creation from China. So this umbilical cord needs to be cut off. Restrictions have to be placed on the award of government contracts to Chinese companies. There has to be a strengthening of the Quad. We have to step up our engagements with the members of the Quad. There has to be furthering of economic and diplomatic ties with Taiwan, which has been a friend in need. There has to be greater support for Hong Kong, as well as for the freedom of navigation in the South China Sea, as well as a strengthening of the Indian narrative about Chinese transgressions at the international level, because currently the attempt from the Chinese side is to portray India as the aggressor. So the bottom line being is that India is in for a long haul, and India needs to prepare itself for being in this long haul, because Xi Jinping or the CCP is not going to back down very easily, because attention deflection is very essential at this particular juncture. With that, I come to the end of my segment. Thank you for your patience.
Thank you, Sriparna. It was very, very exhaustive in its, but being a little more micro in its nature. You have really highlighted all the kinds of issues that plague the two countries, especially China. And the last line was very, very well taken, that China is trying to project to everyone in the world that India is the aggressor. But that's very strategic road which India is building up there high in the Himalayas to connect and bring back to the airstrip military in a very fast way, because that is basically now the point of contention. And China, with a lot of economic kind of issues with India, many multinationals moving their base to either India or any other part of the world, the possibilities, I think, will limit China, because only yesterday, the official television of Chinese television was very, very toned down when they said that both the countries should settle issues and have dialogues. That gives a huge kind of silver line as we welcome the third speaker of today, Ritusha Tiwari, who is also a very, very notable student of Srikant Kondapalli sir, and also she is by herself a Chinese expert from the Institute of Chinese Studies and also Delhi University. I would request Professor Sriparna Roy to now introduce Professor Dr. Ritusha Tiwari. Sriparna, please.
Thank you, sir. Am I audible?
Yes.
Thank you. Good evening, everybody. It gives immense pleasure and honor to introduce Dr. Ritusha Mani Tiwari, a visiting fellow at the Institute of Chinese Studies, Delhi, teaches in the Department of Political Science, Shahid Bhagat Singh College, University of Delhi. She holds a PhD in Chinese Studies from Jawaharlal Nehru University, New Delhi. The current focus of her research includes unpacking the interplay of power and hegemony in East Asia and China's role in shaping regionalism therein. She was the recipient of the visiting program for young sinologists in 2017, awarded by the Ministry of Culture, People's Republic of China, and the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences, Beijing. She was earlier awarded the International Visitor Leadership Program by the Department of State, USA, in 2016, and Peabody Fellowship at the Politics and International Studies Department, University of Cambridge, UK, in 2013. She was a visiting scholar at the Shanghai Academy of Social Sciences, Shanghai, in 2012. She is interested in the questions of leadership, hegemony, and power in South Asia and East Asia, with an emphasis on strategic thought in China and India. Her other research interests include studying gender, peace, and conflict. She is the assistant editor of China Report, a journal of East Asian studies, since 2016. Thank you, ma'am, for being with us. Now I would request Dr. Ritusha Mani Tiwari to enlighten us with her valuable words. Thank you, ma'am. Please.
Thank you, Dr. Roy. I hope I'm audible.
Yes, ma'am, you are.
Yes. Thank you for that introduction. And I would like to extend my gratitude and thanks to Dr. Nayak, who invited me to this seminar, and to Professor Chatterjee for organizing this and putting all of us together to deliberate on this very crucial and seminal issue. For today's presentation, I'm going to focus on the current aspects of India-China dispute with some kind of emphasis and some suggestions for policy imperatives. I would like to kind of just elaborate on certain points and then leave it to the audience to sort of take questions from there on and deliberate more on the kind of suggestions that we need for the road ahead that is there in India-China dispute at present, because that is what we are trying to focus upon in this particular seminar. So to begin with, where do we stand right now? We know that there were some kind of hopes for an early disengagement and de-escalation after the kind of conciliatory statements that were given by both the countries and the diplomatic circles and the political class in the past few days. And there was a meeting between the armies of the two countries, and in the last 15 days, much difference has actually happened. The meetings that were held at different levels of military commanders spanning from 6th to 10th to 15th June, and they continuing for 10 days, saw a kind of unfolding of this engagement process where it was expected that we would be able to decide and finalize at least the current phase of negotiation for the kind of dispute that has unfolded in the Western sector. But the incident of arm-to-arm combat and bloodshed that basically unfolded put this process of negotiation on a backseat, and an early resolution is now almost looking unlikely. China has reasserted its claim over Galwan Valley, and its army has also made many, army as well as political leadership has made many statements alleging that it was indeed the Indian soldiers who twice crossed the LAC. Now, if we go back a little bit, we'll know that India and China had identified 23 disputed and sensitive areas along the LAC, and both Galwan in Ladakh and Nakula in Sikkim actually do not figure on that list. But now in this current round of conflict dispute, we see them coming to fore, and actually China has certain claim over both these areas. Now, moving on to the fact that there were ideas about the trigger points of this kind of conflict. Many scholars have actually suggested that this situation has been put into a kind of configuration by certain aspects of insecurity dilemma, whereas both the countries have been developing their national powers, it is imperative that they will basically move towards a collision course. So massive infrastructure work that basically China had been doing for the last 1 decade along the LAC. And now the kind of similar work that we see from Indian side is one aspect of this insecurity dilemma. It also includes the idea of one belt, one road by China in this area, and also the kind of reservation that Indian government had with that regard, and not really jumping onto the bandwagon of OBOR, at least not in this area and not in any other area in that sense. So that kind of antagonism that was there to China's one belt, one road policy also kind of contributed further to this insecurity dilemma. And the pragmatic and very prudent policies decision of Indian side to not really immediately allow Chinese investment in market without government intervention is something that further adds to this idea of configuration of conflict of interest. India's partnerships at global level that have been forging in the last 10 years, and the kind of clout that India has come to enjoy in the both North and South bloc, as it were, in the world politics, is something that also puts India in the role of a larger strategic power in the region. And India's caution against transgressing any kind of alliance, existing alliance, or joining any kind of bloc gives it a very unique capacity to sort of negotiate both the North and South in that sense, putting it also as a very viable competitor in this region against China. So all of these factors have been sort of triggering the current crisis. And last but not the least, it is also because there's been a lot of backlash against China due to the kind of COVID response that the country came up with. And a lot of world public opinion has actually gone against China. The sentiment against China finds its root in the kind of perception that emerged after China's response related to early warning regarding COVID was much maligned and taken as something which was quite inefficient and deliberately not given in time, and so on and so forth. So keeping all of this backdrop in mind, what are the kind of policy recommendations that we sort of can envisage? It is imperative that we look at this entire idea of policy imperatives to resolve the current crisis, not in the short term, but with its long-term impact. And to give a concrete foreign policy response is very important, and not a sporadic reaction to just the ongoing dispute. It is my contention that we seem to be stuck in the direction offset by a lot of historical mistakes, colonial shenanigans, and policy lags in this particular idea of foreign policy response towards China, so far as boundary dispute is concerned. Now, a lot of scholars and experts have been sort of giving their opinion about what are the kind of approaches that India could be taking so far as shaping its policy response is concerned vis-a-vis China. One approach which seems to be very dominant is that we take China as India's principal long-term adversary and keep it as India's main strategic goal in terms of its main strategic goal being defined in terms of China as carefully calculated policies that neutralize China's diplomatic and military clout in Asia-Pacific region, without, of course, making India appear as a proxy for other powers and without sacrificing India's autonomy of decision-making in foreign policy. As compared to the kind of sentiments that are associated with this approach, there's also another approach which is basically given forth by other scholars, by other experts, and that is to take China not perhaps as best of the allies, but as a working partner and take it from there. The gradual easing out of boundary dispute then in that sense may be defined by at least, first of all, permanently fixing the goalposts by coming up with a policy statement independently and then perhaps negotiating about it or negotiating over it with China. It is imperative that while we need to formulate our policy response, our policy statement with regards to what are our fixed deals regarding boundary dispute with China, it is important that we keep at least two red flags in mind while formulating these. And these two red flags are in the form of two questions, and I think they have been raised time and again. But to put it more clearly, it's not about the strategic objectives of India alone, that what are our strategic objectives. It's also that do we comprehend China's strategic objectives? And a lot of scholars have been saying that the two countries do not understand each other. There's less of a clarity in terms of how the countries see each other vis-a-vis their roles in the region and beyond, and so on and so forth. So to put it in that kind of perspective, it's also important to start defining or understanding, comprehending the other side's strategic objectives. And I think some of the strategic objectives are very clear from the observations that we have since last 2 decades, which is perhaps, and these strategic objectives of China remain in continuum in that sense. And there are a few new ones that are added in the post-COVID or in a post-pandemic world. So the first one is, of course, the political stability and the legitimacy of Chinese Communist Party in terms of then being able to modulate and regulate and give impetus to economic growth. The second is to navigate an increasingly complex and antagonistic world public opinion, which has emerged in this entire post-COVID conundrum. The third one is to emerge successful in the power rivalry with the US, including the current round of trade war. And then finally, to counter the emergence of counter alliances in the region. Now, if we take at least 4 of these as the givens in China's strategic objectives, it's possible for us to then see where China locates us in all of this complex matrix of strategic objectives. The second question that we need to be very wary of is that are we maximizing our strategic capabilities to full potential? India, as I said earlier, has a unique position of being able to navigate and negotiate and forge alliances in both the North and the South. And therefore, it gives credence to India's, idea of giving an increasing strategic role in Indian Ocean region and this particular region in a sense, which is also a future hub of economic growth and alliances. So it is common to hear of India and China in a kind of continuum in this region, but it is also very common to put both India and China in the framework of just the boundary dispute. And this boundary dispute itself has been characterized in terms of a very, very loose strategic clarity. When I say loose strategic clarity, I mean that every time you hear about the dispute, it's basically about an uninhabited territory, inhospitable terrain, a colonial legacy, or an unfinished business between the two newly developed nations. We know that when two states contest for a territory, there's always a motive behind it, and the motive has not really been very clearly defined. So unless you define the motive of this boundary dispute as beyond all of these oft-repeated cliches, it's very difficult to come up with very substantial and crucial, well-defined strategic objectives behind now solving these boundary dispute on both the sides. Motives could have been more clearly defined in terms of historical, economic, or political goalposts that the two countries have right now. And these aspects would then help us define the conflict more clearly in terms of the kind of interest that the two countries are seeking. Now, in reality, apart from the kind of strategic and military relevance that this border represents for India and China, the dispute also centers around the area where the border is also thought to contain substantial quantities of natural resources, and which is considered vital for the economic development of both the states in the area.
Ma'am, you have 3 minutes to finish.
Yeah, I'm just finding out. So the strategy of the Indian policy makers, which has been to basically freeze the status quo on the boundary, which basically makes any diplomatic resolution of the states of the dispute pending, is dangerous and threatens to worsen the chances of peaceful negotiation and resolution, giving way to such standoffs as the current one, because the status quo is not very, very stable. To solve a territorial dispute will actually demand the boundary being defined in terms of mine or thine, with certain definable rights, laws, and jurisdiction of sovereignty. And to be able to do that, to be able to come up with that kind of a mine or thine solution about what exactly we are coveting and what exactly are we willing to negotiate, it can only be viably solved by achieving mutual agreement from both the sides. And to convert this present standoff into a kind of win-win situation and not a win-lose situation for us. The only constructive solution to the boundary dispute is actually diplomatic and political one. Keeping the military standoffs like the current one in backseat and not giving rise to such incidents in future. I'll stop here and I'll try to take more in terms of questions and answers. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Tiwari. You have touched some of the very basic issues that really are in vogue, a very true academic kind of standpoint, but then being very specific on the boundary line in LAC is difficult. If you go to the terrain and see how the rivers and the snow-capped mountains kind of stand. So the two kind of sides come very close to each other and lead to standoffs. This has been something which is going on for years, and I don't see that these things might not be mitigated. But what can be mitigated really is that for two nuclear nations, two of the biggest enemy armies in the world, such kind of face-off is something which the world, not only the subcontinent, but the world will not, subcontinent, continent, and the world would not like to have. So I am sure there would be a dialogue and there would be some way which would be found. But we really, the Indian Army also has got certain reasons of being very angry on the issues that have really happened since 2017, since Dokulam and the other issues. I would now go to the one of the best speakers that I have seen in my life, Shubin Bhomik, who's been with the BBC for a long time. He's a celebrated author, a columnist, and a mentor to me. I would want Professor Agniva Banerjee to please introduce Mr. Shubin Bhomik. Over to you, Agniva.
It's an immense honor to be able to introduce such an eminent journalist. So Shubin Bhomik is Senior Fellow with the Indian think tank Center for Studies in International Relations and Development. He's a former BBC
Come on, no.
I'm so sorry, sir.
What the hell, man?
He's a former BBC correspondent.
Introduction
journalist and analyst of Eastern and Northeastern India. His eminent work on the subject is troubled periphery, the crisis of India's Northeast. He has presented extensively in both India and abroad. It is an immense honor, sir, to be able to hear you this evening. Thank you, sir. Over to you.
Okay, Mrityunjay, thank you very much. You're able to hear me? Okay. Right.
Yes, we hear
okay. Now, what the introduction did not say is that I'm a student of India's best military school, Rashtra Indian Military College. And as a cadet there, in 1968, I did my Army attachment course exactly in this Galwan Valley area. So I know this place like the back of my hand. Only thing is it's a long time since I was there. I've been there later, but basically a lot of new constructions and all that has happened. So I know the ground realities and why this whole thing happened. But let me make 4 quick points first before I actually roll on. I must congratulate General Mukherjee, Sriporna, and Ritusha particularly. Very nicely put everything, very well put. But the point I'm trying to make here is I'm going to say a lot of things which have not been raised here. Number one, why did, after the Kashmir reorganization, the Indian Foreign Minister Jai Shankar, who knows China well, he was the ambassador there, he speaks the language, he has got a lot of friends. He told them, as he told the Bangladeshis about NRC, this is India's internal exercise. Okay? There is no impact on B&B, which is bilateral relations and border. In 4 days' time, Mr. Amit Shah, who has not done NCC in his life, got up to say, जब तक हम पाकिस्तान कश्मीर और अक्साई चीन को अपने में समेट नहीं लेते, मैं चैन का नींद नहीं लूंगा. Now that was a very direct provocation, and Mr. Jaishankar had to rush back to convince the Chinese, because Wang Yi was supposed to come here to take forward the Xi Jinping Narendra Modi summit, and he went off to Pakistan and he said a lot of adverse things about the Kashmir reorganization. Now, Jaishankar ji had to go back. He's exactly my contemporary in JNU. He had to go back to the Chinese and say, well, in Indian politics, a lot of people say, you know, this Jumla thing. Now, the Chinese don't understand Jumla because they don't have elections in their country. They take a long-term perspective of things. If they mess up, they mess up. They try to cover it up. But the point is, they don't have to say these Jumlas. And our practice of Jumla, which has multiplied in the last 6 years, you know, to an unimaginable level, which actually obstructs and disturbs actual sound policy making. Now, I'm trying to come here to say that moment they said this, Jaishankar went and managed the Chinese diplomatic establishment. Xi Jinping came to India. Modi took him round the Tamil temples as if he was an expert on Tamil temple architecture, but that's besides the point here. The thing is, you have to know the military mind. General John Mukherjee was here, he's an old friend of mine. And I've been in the military system as a cadet. I know that the military, moment they figure out that your enemy has your eyes on certain part of your territory. Now, Aksai Chin is very important for the Chinese because it connects two of the most restive regions of China. Xinjiang, where they have the Uyghur problem, the Uyghur Muslim problem, and of course Tibet. And therefore in 1960, as Sriparna would recollect, Ritusha would recollect, and General John would recollect, that the Chow En Lai, when he came to India, he made a clear swap offer. You accept our position in Aksai Chin, we accept the McMahon line. Because China has sorted out their border problem with Myanmar by accepting the McMahon line. So they had no big deal there. Okay? Nehru, in his wisdom, did not do it. And here again, I come back to the main point. You know, if you depend on the Americans to do certain things, you get into a lot of trouble. And General John said this. In the late 50s, we said Tibet is a part of China. We said Hindi Chini Bhaiba, and the Chinese said it. But India and US, as I've written in my book, Insurgent Crossfire in great details, boosted the covert war in Tibet. The Tibetan guerrillas were trained by India, and the best ones were sent to America for training. And they were dropped back by parachute into Tibet, and they made things very difficult for the Chinese. There was a command structure in Delhi, a secret command structure, in which the CIA station chief in Delhi, Harry Rossitsky, was involved. On our side, those days, no RAW, IB's foreign affairs, foreign operations team was involved. And of course, the guerrillas of the Tensung Mangla Magar. I don't know whether guys have heard of it. It's the National Volunteers Defense Army. Guys like Amdo Leshe, whose book I've translated, I've got it translated, 5 Rivers and 7 Mountains, details how the Indians and the Americans boosted that war. And General John is right. It's not the border. The Chinese would actually, they're different from us. They can give you a part of their territory if it means political advantage. Today, I had a difference with Jaidev Ranade, who headed the China desk in RAW. He said, Chinese have not made so much investment to come into Ladakh that they will go back. I said, sir, you're wrong. They will go back if you give them 5G Huawei contract, or you give them something very big. They always weigh things, pros and cons. They are not feudals like us, our leaders, who will say, "Ek inch jameen nahi chhodenge." You know, because our guys fight over land, and that feudal thing creeps through into the political structure. So the point is that the Chinese, you may say they are demons. I know them very well. Last 10 years, I've been in the Calcutta Kumbing Forum, and I've interacted with them extensively. I've trained Chinese journalists of the Yunnan TV, and I know them reasonably well. I don't know the language as Sriparna does, or maybe Ritusha does, but then I know them. And I have my own ways of figuring things out as a journalist. Now here, this whole backing to the Tibetan movement, the Chinese said several times, you will see then Chow En Lai warning India, don't fall into the trap of the imperialists and the reactionaries, meaning stop backing this Tibetan armed movement. You're giving shelter to Dalai Lama, bad enough. We don't like it. you are actually arming the Tibetans. So the 62 war came. It's not just forward policy. It's not. And here I differed with my friend Neville Maxwell, who was in Oxford when I went there, that it's not about few inches of land. It's not about the area where the blade of grass does not grow, as Nehru had said. It's about destabilizing Tibet as the Chinese would see it. And today again, those symptoms are there. Now coming back to this, 62. Then in 1966, they waited for 4 more years to normalize. When it didn't happen, they started arming the Naga guerrillas, and Tuingaleng Muiwa and Brigadier Thinozeli with 353 with 353 Naga guerrillas went to China. 97 days, they ended up in Yunnan. Since then, the Chinese trained 7 batches of Nagas, 3 batches of Mizo rebels, and of course the Manipuri Ojas, 17 of them, and a couple of other groups. They didn't exactly train the Alpha or the Naxalites in India because the Chinese thought these are useless guys. They can't fight the Indian army. Okay? I mean, Paresh Barua may think he's a great fighter. He's not. But anyway, let me come back to the point. Now here, the lesson with China is that don't create false hostility if you're not prepared to face them. Here in Ladakh this time, Mr. Amit Shah starts this whole process by saying, "Hum Aksai Chin kabje mein lenge." The military is Chinese. Well, Xi Jinping listens to Jai Shankar.
Sir, I will remind you, this is an academic discussion.
Well, I'm not an academic person strictly. I'm giving you the field thing. Yeah?
But
then you invite 4 professors and leave me out. But I'm giving you the actual stuff. Please try to understand this. That if you are not prepared to face China and the consequences of it militarily, you don't provoke them into something like this. But finally, the summit happened and everything went. The Chinese military, because they've realized that the Indians may do something in Aksai Chin, they come in. They start coming in moment there is this, snow melting, and of course the COVID situation, the Indian army was avoiding close patrolling. They come in, they take up the high points, which could be used by the Indians as staging posts, and they start constructing this dam-like structure in Galwan River. Why? Weaponizing water. In the Indians attack, they will blast this dam and flood the whole area. So all these preparations they started making to ensure, A, that the Indians can never attack Aksai Chin and threaten that road. B, the Indian constructions, which we think is for our defense, they think it's for our offense, because this Darbuk Shayok road goes up to Daulat Beg Oldi. Now you can land American heavy-duty aircrafts. You can mobilize a division in 36 hours. You can strike on the eastern side towards Aksai Chin. On the western side, you can interdict the Karakoram Pass, which is the beginning of the China-Pakistan economic corridor. So in this context, you see the whole thing. Now, the point I'll make 2 more points here before I'll stop. You provoke the Chinese. When they come at you like mad dogs, then you develop cold feet. And what is the order that General Harinder Singh is getting from Delhi? 3 Ds. Disengage, de-escalate, diffuse. Is a military man trained for that? You put him in a situation, he's a terrific soldier, I can vouch for that. You have the Chinese coming all over the place, pressure everywhere, incursions everywhere, and then he's supposed to see it with bangles in his hand. He's supposed to sit in his car, lock it up as the mad dogs come running in with no instruction to take any counter measures. This is where we got to when the Chinese finally decided that they will push forward, and we decided to stop them. And then what happened? The Indians went and demolished the Ghathaks of the 3rd Punjab, went and demolished. 10 of them threw their swords. 10 of them, because I have guys there. Yeah, I'm from military school. I've got friends there. They demolished that water structure, and Galwan River started flowing again. And then what happened? Then the Chinese got furious. They came to patrol point number 14. They set up a tent. Colonel Babu was told that these Chinese are not going back. Everywhere they're going back, but here they're not. So he went to sort out that problem. The fight started. When the fight started, there were instructions. So there are instructions not to carry fire weapons, okay? Firearms. That's fine. It's part of the BDCA protocol. But not even carry sharp weapons. because we are trying to be extra cautious, not you don't want to provoke a war there, why did you threaten to take back Aksai Chin and start this Jumla? Point is, then what happened? Then these people, they attacked, and the Indians were on the defensive. The 16th Bihar was on the defensive. Other Paltans rushed in. The gunners of medium artillery, the Sardars, they rushed in. The Ghathaks of the 3rd Punjab, they rushed in. And also the 11th Bahars. It was a huge fight. And until 8:30, you know, we had almost sort of 34 Indian dead, 23 confirmed dead, 11 missing. You had about 18 to Chinese, 20 casualties among the Chinese. The Chinese colonel was taken by the Sardars and brought in as a prisoner. 10 of our guys were made prisoners and that kind of thing. And the whole thing stopped. Now, what the Indian press has not written so far, and I've written this, is that in the great urge to sanitize defense coverage so that China is not provoked any further, the action that General Harinder initiated later that night, when he sent in the Ghathaks, there were 2 positions where the Chinese had slipped through the ridge and put up their tents on the road, which supplies these ridge points, forward ridge points of the Indians, 15 each. The Indians took out those and almost 100% casualty. 29 Chinese soldiers died. I'm saying this to all the authority. They're bayoneted to death. And pictures of Xi Jinping and his wife was left there with something written beneath. Next time we come for you, dash Indian Army. Okay, specific information. At night, there was an explosion and a whole hill collapsed on one Chinese camp. The Chinese blame it on the Indians. The Indians say it's hands of God because there was a lot of, I don't really know what happened, but a lot of Chinese died there. Point here that I'm trying to make is, now General Harinder has made 7 very definite proposals. And today I have seen in the Weibo.
Sir, just 2 minutes more. Because,
so now I have seen that the Chinese Weibo, there was an attempt to sack General Harinder or take him out from there by some people in Delhi who thought he's escalating a war. General Navarane put his foot down and said, no, he's the man to stop the Chinese. But there are others who thought he's escalating the war. The trouble is, I'll finish with this, because I know military science. You lose a war in your mind before you lose it on ground. And you lose it when your war aims are not clear. You provoke a situation like this just for the sake of bloody Jumla winning a few elections, and then you don't allow the army to go on the offensive defense to stop the Chinese. You try to hold them back. You try to then say, this general is escalating the problem. He's a tough Sardar. He's aggressive and he may start the fight. Absolutely wrong. You're getting it wrong, man. You are being unfair to your soldiers. You're being unfair to your country. You are being unfair to everybody. So please read J.P. Dalby's Himalayan Blunder. It was a failure of the higher directions of war. I will finish here by saying that the Chinese soldier is bullshit. He's nothing. Yeah? China has been having one-child policy. So ye log sab ek baap ka beta hai, marna nahi chahta hai. Secondly, they're a prosperous country. Whereas the Indian soldier lugs all his luggage and goes up there 20-kilometer trek. The Chinese flies allowed in helicopter. I've spoken to the Sardars of the Ghatak Paltan. They say, sir, ye machhar hai, kuch nahi. I asked them, you know, in unarmed combat, are they using kung fu and all that? Sir ji, shor sharaba karda, kuch nahi hai, bekar hai. But the thing is, you have to remember that time and again in Indian history, we have lost war because of generals, not because of our brave soldiers. And you have lost war because of inefficient, inept political leaders. I just want to remind everybody here who are listening to me that please understand one thing. What was said about Alexander, he faced furious resistance in India. But this stood time in vain. This was in vain because a disunited people could not long resist the entire forces of the Hellenic world, led by the greatest captain of ancient Europe. Now, if you have poor captains up there, will suddenly say there was no intrusion in the LSE. What the hell is happening? So India has to be very clear about what it wants with the Chinese, how you're going to deal with the Chinese, where you're going to hit them. I have myself, through some of my sources in the Hong Kong, I've done active measures, putting up the list of 30 dead, confirmed dead Chinese soldiers in the Weibo. There was a hue and cry. people who are related to these soldiers,
Sir,
they started writing.
Sir,
No, just 1 minute.
Yeah.
They started writing that in India they are getting, they are getting honored by, during their cremation. Here, our government, as Sriporna rightly said, there is lot of anger in China. You got to play into that. And at the end, I will tell you one simple thing. A country with a great army is no good if you have a poor intelligence. Please concentrate on your intelligence. Develop professional intelligence officers. Don't get policemen to run everything from BSF to CRPF to state police to ITBP to RAW to SIB. Let policemen be policemen and stick to their states and do their job. Let us have professional intelligence officer. Let us have professional border guards, and all border guarding force should be under the army because they face the foreign enemy first. Yeah. Now there is an attempt to, after ITBP, to even bring Assam Rifles under the Home Ministry. This rubbish empire building must stop at political level. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Bhomik, passionate as usual. And some of the basics that he always speaks and speaks his mind. And it is absolutely an analysis of Mr. Bhomik. Adamus University is an academic institute. Let me now introduce the speaker who is an expert in this field from Jawaharlal Nehru University. And I would welcome Professor Srikant Kondapalli to really give his total achievements. I would also introduce Professor Jitendra Nayak, the head of the Department of Political Science at Adamus University, School of Liberal Arts and Culture Studies, to please introduce Professor Kondapalli.
Thank you, Professor. After such an exciting and exuberating presentation, we are now moving back to Professor Srikant Kondapalli. Because of his certain engagement, he could not was there in the very initial, but I welcome you, sir. A very brief biography of Professor Srikant Kondapalli. He is the professor in Chinese Studies at Jawaharlal Nehru University Center for East Asian Studies, SIS JNU, from 2008 until now. He's educated in Chinese Studies in India, China, with a PhD in Chinese Studies. He learned Chinese language at Beijing Language and Culture University and was a postdoctoral in 2014, Yunnan University of Finance and Economics, Kunming in 2016, and a non-resident senior fellow at People's University since 2014. He was also a fellow at Salzburg Global Seminar in 2010, and he wrote two prominent books, China's Military, the PLA in Transition in 1999, and China's Naval Power in 2001. Two monographs are also co-edited 5 volumes, Asian Security, China in 2004, China, Its Neighbors in 2010, China's Military and India in 2012, which is quite relevant at the current moment, China in the Brisk, setting up the different kitchen in 2016, and One Belt, One Road, popularly known as OBOR, China's Global Outreach. And the list goes on. He is also a recipient of K. Subramaniam Award in 2010 for excellence in research and strategic and security studies. So I welcome you for such a webinar, and we are eagerly waiting to hear from you. Over to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Nayak. And let me also thank Professor Chatterjee. Fellow panelists, it has been an exciting discussion so far. So since much of the topic has been covered, let me just put across 3 points. First is because the terrain has been covered, the border dispute, the CBM's approaches, the incident that happened on June 15 night, and the other details. So let me straight away come to the point that what is the significance of this May 5th till now incidents in the India-China border areas? To my mind, I think it is militarization of the border areas. Mao Zedong in 1962 mentioned about armed coexistence, not peaceful coexistence. And then he predicted that this will go on for at least 3 decades. And then subsequently, of course, we have had several CBMs, treaties, and various others, but the problem still remains, which is the unresolved nature of the territorial dispute between India and China. Now, this is one of the longest in terms of the talks so far. Nearly 40 years of discussions have taken place in a very formal manner at various levels. Yet they did not find a solution for various reasons. And as a consequence of that, we have Galwan now. As a consequence, we had Nakula, we had various other incidents on the line of actual control. Even the line of actual control is not defined. Of course, for the local level soldiers, they know where their claim area is on both sides. And hence it appeared that the lack of definition of LAC, line of actual control, itself has created a lot of uncertainty on the border. So what we have seen in the last 1.5 months is militarization of the border areas. Now, there are various reports. We do not know the accuracy of these reports. What we know is we had 20 Indian soldiers killed. What we know is that there were skirmishes. And then we have some information about the mobilization of forces. On the Indian side, the report suggested about a brigade strength, about 5,000 troops. On the Chinese side, 2 divisions, that is about 20,000 troops, has been mentioned. We do not know about the veracity of these, but it appeared that it is a large-scale mobilization. Even during the Doklam crisis in 2017, we did not see any large-scale mobilization. It was at the most 370 odd soldiers on either side together that appeared on the Doklam crisis. But in this case, if these reports are correct, then we see a huge militarization that has happened in the India-China border areas, especially in the western sector, but not the. But it doesn't mean that they won't mobilize on middle sector, Sikkim sector, or in the eastern sector. So, in other words, there is a possibility for the entire border being militarized in the coming years. And this has happened not just because of the LAC not being clarified, but also because of the geopolitics. It's also because of the sovereignty claims. It's because of the COVID-19. One report suggested, since India is busy with the COVID-19, this is the best chance for China to mobilize forces and nibble away territories. We don't know again whether that is true or not, but there is a certain causal connection to that factor. So that needs to be also kept in mind when we discuss this issue. So what we have is that the militarization has been formalized both in Doklam, not so much in Doklam, but in Balakot and in Uri, when the leadership, political leadership, suggested to a free rein to the military forces. Because there was a speculation that before, the military leadership was not given the free rein, and political leadership was pulling back the military in executing their operations, in their professional duties. So you may have seen after the all-party meeting, there has been a clarification that has been made in which it has been mentioned that a free rein has been given to the armed forces to decide, to look at the local operational requirements and pursue their objectives. Now, Of course, in any democracy, there is always the element of checks and balances. And these are not operating in silos, in different silos. The military operating in a different silo, the civilian leadership, the various other segments. It is not true. There is always a give and take, because after the June 15th incident, on that night, we have had the foreign ministry suggesting that the local patrols can be armed, but under only extraordinary conditions that they can open fire. So, in other words, the militarization of this has huge consequences for the India-China border areas, and possibly, as Dr. Jaishankar has mentioned, after the June 15th incident, it will have serious implications, as he said to his counterpart Wang Yi, on the bilateral relations, not just on the border, but also on the bilateral relations. Now, what does that mean? Is that there is now a sanction for use of force, only under, of course, extraordinary conditions. Previously, we have had no such facility, but this round will provide the Indian Armed Forces enough assurances to complete their own military objectives. What are the military objectives? The military objectives on June 15th night, or on that day, is configured on the June 6th commanders meeting at Moldo, opposite to Chushul in the western sector, where they said about disengagement, de-escalation process. So the objective was status quo ante that existed in April 2020. Now that is the objective. All militaries follow limited objectives and overall objectives. They were given the local level commanders till the top are given these objectives to fulfill. Now the objective is status quo ante as that existed in April 2020. So that's a limited objective. But June 15 suggested that the Chinese were resisting to vacate that tent on the petrol point 14. There were also the petrol point 15 and 17 at Gogra and other places. Now, on June 22nd, the commanders meeting suggested once again to go back to the disengagement policy. That means that now, once again, the disengagement policy has been reconvened. So we have to see the progress, and if the progress is not so positive, then we are prepared for some kind of an alternative situation on the border. It could be anything that only the armed forces then can decide. Of course, there is the political leadership's intervention, as always, but here there is a free rein given in that sense to the armed forces. Now we have to then explore the possibilities of disengagement. If that does not happen, possibly we should be expecting something else on the border areas. So that is one point that I would like to make. For the first time, we have seen militarization did exist before. As I mentioned, Mao Zedong's armed coexistence. But what is different this time is that we have now a specific orders given by the Prime Minister's office to the armed forces. And that makes it, in the Chinese case, of course, there is a political commissar, there is a commander, they have to meet and discuss the local situation. And then there is the Central Military Commission, the Western Theater Command in between will have to pursue those objectives. In the case of China, it is not clear what the exact objectives are, because if you look at the 1960 position of China, when they met in New Delhi, Rangoon, and Beijing to discuss the territorial dispute resolution, their maps, which were sent at the time, circulated at the time, were completely different from what their claims now are. So, in other words, then the Chinese military objectives are to nibble away as much territory as possible. And in that sense, we are going to see some trouble on the border in the coming years. So the specific thing here is in relation to those militarization that China has made, and India responded with nearly 5,000 troops and estimated. We don't know exact facts, but this is what is reported in the. So June 15th then suggests that we now do not utter the word of peace and tranquility. We do not utter the word of no fire being, no shots were being fired since 1967. So we are entering into a new charter in the India-China relations with serious consequences, of course, for the bilateral relations. That is the signaling for China here, that we have prepared now to look at this in a more concrete manner. Most important, as it is circulated in the press as every inch of land to be protected. That is the line that has been given. So that is where the preparation is. The line has come because also the second factor that I would like to mention is nationalism, which has now been a major variable in the bilateral relations. China, we knew that nationalism has grown substantially. Chinese nationalism was against the US, against Japan, sometimes against smaller states in the South China Sea, but essentially it is in this format. It is also acquiring a larger global dimension in terms of nationalism, reflected in China Dream, China Rejuvenation, or other slogans given recently. Now, what does that mean for India-China relations? Because this is a new factor that has come in the last few years. So nationalism would mean then we have to revisit many aspects of the bilateral relations. For instance, Sushma Swaraj, the then foreign minister, in May 2014, meeting with her counterpart Wang Yi, who came as a special envoy of President Xi Jinping, she asked, so far, in the last 50, 60 years, since 1954, we accepted the One China policy. What about One India policy? And then there was no reply from the Chinese foreign minister. And this is a crucial element in any diplomatic practice. If the other side is asking you to sign on something, you also seek reciprocity. It is a fundamental tenet of diplomacy. So in 1954, India recognized Tibet as part of China. And then in 1950, between 1949 and 50, in the 3 months discussion, they have also recognized Taiwan as part of China. But so far, what Sushma Swaraj was suggesting is, so far, China did not recognize Jammu and Kashmir and Ladakh as part of India. So this is the reciprocal arrangement which will have far serious consequences in the coming years for China, in the background of what has happened on June 15th, but also since May 5th events. That is where much of the discussion is also happening. So this is the background for the and implication for the June 15th incidents. One of the consequences in terms of the border that we are seeing is that since 1962, when China imposed its will on India, it had occupied, even prior to that, it had occupied many areas which it thought it was, but it was never given any clarity in terms of maps or a written agreement that these lands belong to China. And some of these are also, for example, 1893 map of Xinjiang does not recognize Aksai Chin as part of the Xinjiang province. So there are inconsistencies on the Chinese part. What has happened after 62 is China imposing that the whole of Aksai Chin is part of China. And since 1980s, when India was busy with the Kashmir counterinsurgency operations and has to withdraw troops from the LAC areas, China started moving into this. And as a result, we lost Kurnak Fort in Pankung So Lake in the southern portion. And one of the main areas that is going to be problematic now is between finger point 4 to finger point 8. And what China did was to construct artillery and other permanent facilities so that the Indian patrols cannot move from finger point 4 to finger point 8, which is the Indian claimed line of actual control. So what has happened in this period is since 1980s, when India was busy with the Jammu and Kashmir related events, which were mainly triggered by Pakistan, we see that China-Pakistan related aspects have helped China to grab as much land as the Indian military withdrew for various reasons from those regions. So this has added once again to the tensions between China and India currently. So this has a long background, and some estimate that this is not just about 38,000 square kilometers of Aksai Chin, but as much as 52,000 square kilometers that was occupied since the 1980s. So it is not a new problem that we are seeing on exactly where is the patrol point 14 is, whether it is on the Indian claimed LAC or on the Chinese claimed LAC. But as we saw in the, I will
finish in just 3 minutes.
I will
take some questions.
Yes. So the argument here is that there is the nationalism is trying to cushion those issues and come to the reciprocal arrangements between India and China. And that is where we are going to see much consternation in the India-China bilateral. So where do we go now? The title of our discussion today, what are the options? What should India do in terms of the situation? Of course, the current situation is still tense. As somebody said, the Chinese have sent positive signals through the various channels. However, the ground situation is that they have not vacated the Galwan area. In fact, we have seen some buildup in this region, and also Pankung So. So the main objective of going back to April 2020 has not been fulfilled yet. That is the military objective. If that is not fulfilled, we are going to see some trouble on the border. And June 15th or even possibly other methods would probably have to be adopted in order to secure those military objectives. That should be clear. So for this, there has been mobilization, there has been meeting of these objectives. So what should India do? At the Xiamen meeting of the BRICS in 2017, after the Doklam crisis, there was the proposal that the current CBMs only allowed the Chinese to grab more land since 1993. So the suggestion was that if you want to avoid the Doklam kind of crisis, you have to have a new set of CBMs, which would actually respect the line of actual control. The new set of CBMs have not yet been proposed, not yet been implemented at all. So that is where we are here. So we need to have new CBMs so that there is border stability between India and China. That is an immediate requirement, which was floated in 2017, but we are living in 2020. So that is one key problem. The second, obviously, is we have to go and secure our borders. From Gilgit-Baltistan till Arunachal Pradesh, we have to secure those borders. And that is the objective that we have given to the Indian Armed Forces. the political leadership has given to the Indian Armed Forces. Not even an inch of land to be given in the perceived line of actual control that we have. So that is where we need to work on this. So securing borders is crucial for us. Thirdly, I would also suggest for all this, we need to enhance our conventional and strategic deterrence capabilities. China has been doing it for a long time. China has been mobilizing. The People's Daily has put up photographs of missile systems in Tibet and other areas contiguous to the India-China border areas. So they have widely communicated, which is a crucial element in deterrence in this process. So India has to really think of how to enhance its credible deterrence capabilities in these. In order to avoid, we're all students of IR. In order to avoid the stability-instability paradox, in order to avoid the kind of security dilemmas that Thucydides spoke about, we need to think, we need to look at these issues more closely, and how do we respond at the current situation, not just in Galwan or Pankungso or at the Gogra area, but across the border, which will have obviously serious implications, as Dr. Jaishankar mentioned, for the bilateral relations. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor. It has been a wonderful discussion. We still have around 400, over 400 people watching us on Facebook and listening to us on Facebook, Zoom, and on YouTube. For over 2 hours is a massive kind of attention that we could have gathered through our speakers. I would now kind of go to the people who have asked certain questions. Well, basically the questions are centered around that China is not only pestering India, but trying to take in Nepal, Bangladesh, Bhutan, and all in their kind of fold and kind of influence India through these means. Can India really fight China if that there is a level playing field? What would be the economic kind of parameters if there is a fight? Could China understand that India is a very peace-loving country and settle for a kind of resolution on the border issues? These are the questions that have always come in. Should we or should we not align with America and spoil our relationships with China? That is another big question. Should we kind of boycott the Chinese goods? So these are the basic questions that people have asked. So I would go to General John Mukherjee for the first question. If there is a face-off, God forbid that there should not be. Colonel, are you still with us? General, are you still with us? General John Mukherjee?
Sorry,
I can't hear him. Is he still with us, Jitendra?
Yes, sir, he's there. He's there. He can hear you.
General Mukherjee, if there is a face-off with China, can India defeat, or can we really have some military consequences of winning a war against China? What are your comments about that?
Can you hear me?
General, can you hear me? Hello.
Can you...
General, there is a question. There are several questions. I would be very particular to a question by Professor Naveen Das, who says that in today's globalized world, military might get accentuated by the economic power. China on almost macroeconomics parameters is ahead of India. Does India have any chance of a level playing field or a battlefield against China? These are he basically is leading such questions from many of the people who are listening to us.
As far as Ladakh is concerned, I think in terms of troop deployments, we are more or less evenly matched. There are reports, from what I understand, of build-up against Arunachal also, or towards Arunachal, as also towards Sikkim. I'm sure the Indian Army and the Indian Armed Forces would be able to hold their own against China. So from that point of view, I have no major worry. The issue is, in case Pakistan also joins the fray, because they are a close ally to China, then we may have a few problems on our hands, because we would have to then go totally on the defensive against Pakistan. Because whatever resources we would put together would all be then primarily facing China. I wouldn't like to go into this in further detail because a lot of the information remains classified and should preferably not be talked about. But the Indian Armed Forces are fairly strong and would be able to give a very good account of themselves. And the Indian Navy may also then come into play and create further problems for China. Does that partially answer the question?
That does answer the question, General. I would now go to Professor Pathak. Could you please come on this question? Everybody is asking if there is a kind of a situation of a face-off, what could be the basic micro problems that India might face? What could be the economic consequences that India might face? And what could be the parallel world bodies where India might face problems on all these fronts? Madam Professor Pathak, please.
Thank you for the questions. In case there is an escalation in conflict, the first effect which will take place is definitely in terms of casualties. I am very sure, and as General Mukherjee has also said, the Indian Army will be able to hold ground, but the impacts will definitely be felt in the border regions. This is something which I had learned about from the lived experiences of people living in West Bengal when the 1971 war had happened. There were shortages. There were shortages of regular food, regular supplies. That might happen. That might impact people as well. There might be a possibility, again, just echoing what General John Mukherjee has said, if there's a possibility that Pakistan joins hands, it will be a little more difficult. But then again, I'm very sure that the Indian Army will be able to hold its grounds. Nevertheless, that being said, it's going to be difficult for India. What world bodies could India go to? Well, there are several countries at the moment which have, and Donald Trump himself has raised, he has voiced his opinion in favor of India. So there is a possibility that India might look at other countries to either speak on behalf of India or weigh in on behalf of India. But the fact remains that our foreign policy will still largely be not in alliance with any particular country. We've always had an independent foreign policy. With respect to China, it's going to be the next few years, the next few months is definitely going to be very difficult. And things are going to be difficult even for the common person, especially for the ones living at the border areas. I hope that answers some of the questions.
Yes, it does. I could not particularly go to questions of each person because there is a paucity of time. So I would go to the third question for Professor Ritusha Tewari, that if we ban China's technology, and could India still subsist with made in India, not make in India? and what would be the consequences? Should also he has asked, all they have asked, should we ban China's product and technology? Professor Tiwari, could you come on that?
Yeah, thank you for the questions. I actually saw a couple of more questions addressed to me, but I'll come to the question that you have.
I'm trying to summarize those questions.
Yeah, the first thing was that if I could just elaborate on the kind of questions that we need to be asking before moving towards any kind of policy imperative that we may have as a foreign policy response to the current dispute. So very, very briefly, the two were actually looking at the strategic objectives of China, trying to define and comprehend those strategic objectives, and then formulating a policy response. And at the same time, the second thing that the Indian side should be doing is looking at one's own strategic capabilities, whether they are being maximized to their fullest potential or not. More can be talked about later on this, but as of now, this is where I'll stop. There's also a question with regards to our neighborhood policy, and with not just vis-a-vis China, but all the other neighbors, and whether we are experiencing a weak neighborhood policy moment. In response to that question, I would like to submit that we do need a very urgent recalibration of our neighborhood policy, as it were, and we must enlist certain priority areas in which we seek certain cooperative mechanisms and cooperative stances from all our neighbors, irrespective of the kind of differences that we might have with them. So the neighborhood policy recalibration urgently required, yes. The third thing was whether how strategically important is the North Bengal area. I mean, one cannot stress enough about the importance of strategic locations such as borderlands, and North Bengal falls in the same category. So yes, North Bengal is as strategically important as other sectors of the current dispute that we have with China. Also, how to address the current dispute. As I said, that probably a very comprehensive policy response is required, and the first thing could be putting out a paper together, putting out a objective together as to how we look at our boundary and what are the negotiables that we have on the table, defining certain non-negotiables, and then moving on from there to having a talk with our neighbor. In response to the question that you raised, Professor Chatterjee, whether we should be boycotting Chinese product, I think it's too soon to jump to that kind of conclusion, because any kind of boycott of Chinese products is going to have short-term as well as long-term impact on our economy, our own core sectors of economy like industry and manufacturing, and also trade, hospitality, services, and some agricultural-based industries, as well as real estate. All of these are actually dependent on certain key components that are actually being imported from China. So before moving or jumping onto this kind of a reaction to the current standoff in terms of boycotting Chinese products, we need to assess how much can we actually replace the Chinese product. If we are not taking it from them, where are we actually procuring it from? And if we are not procuring it at this moment of economic downturn, where the IMF has predicted a minus 4.5% growth rate for India in the next 1 year, it's suicidal in that sense. So it's going to impact our employment, it's going to impact our productivity. It's also going to push us towards larger levels of inflation and less level of productivity. So I don't think that's the right approach right now to sort of clamor for this kind of boycott of Chinese product. I'll stop here.
Thank you. I will go to now Mr. Subir Bhowmik. Mr. Bhowmik, everybody has kind of thank you for adrenaline pumping session. And how do you see a way forward? They have asked the economic front. Could we really trust China? Are they trustworthy? How your take on that, Mr. Subir Bhowmik?
I will endorse what Ritusha has said, that this whole boycott thing, first ask Mukesh Ambani to set fire to the 4.35 lakh SIM cards that he bought from China last week for his Jio. Let him set bonfire to that first. First ask Adani, Gautam Adani, to cancel his $300 million deal that he did day before yesterday with a port in China. So, this is all. They will do business with China, and I and you are supposed to make the sacrifice. ये नहीं होने वाला है. Yeah, the Chinese SIM card I could have bought for 5 rupees from the Chinese. Now Mukesh ji will come and sell it to me for 15 rupees because he has the exclusive. Yeah, this is all bullshit. So I endorse Ritusha fully that these kind of knee-jerk reaction, which has become symptomatic of India's policy in this Jumla era, this should stop. If you are a serious nation, and let me tell you, Mrityunjay, I don't know what Ritusha and others think of it. India is not a superpower. We're not going to be a superpower for a very long time. But as Parag Khanna rightly said, India is the most important swing state in all over the world. हम जिसके साइड में रहेंगे उसका पाला भारी रहेगा. And this is where the Chinese have a hitch, that if India swings totally towards the Americans, we are going to be hit very badly in this new emerging balance in Asia. So they want to ensure that you may not be a Chinese ally like Pakistan, but you at least maintain your strategic autonomy and don't become a pittu of Trump and stop this nonsense of Namaste Trump and all these things. You try to decide your priorities, and that should be okay. The move forward with China is, one has to tell the Chinese very clearly, if you think that the American imperialists are coming here, which they say, they are taking advantage of your problem with us because of the border. Why don't you solve it? Xi Jinping is president for life. Modi has the kind of political capital which no Indian leader has enjoyed. Why can't you guys, as Debashish Roy Chaudhary, my friend in South China Morning Post wrote, why should young men in China and India die? Because these old foggies cannot sort this problem out. These Buddhas cannot solve their problem out. So they should go and sit on the table, and if it means that where the blade of grass does not grow, tum 2 inch chhod do. Basically, the solution is the Chavinlai solution. You accept their position in Aksai Chin, they accept your position in McMahon Line and in the rest of the border. They accept Sikkim as a part of India. They accept McMahon Line. They stop calling Arunachal Pradesh Southern Tibet. That's it. Let's go forward. This will be the deal of the century. And maybe Xi and Modi can get Nobel Prize for that. Yeah, additional bonus.
Thank you.
Third thing is, let me just finish 2 more points. Third thing is, this competition in the Indian Ocean. Try to turn, India should realize Indian Ocean is not India's ocean. Similarly, the Chinese also should realize that they have bona fide concerns about their geostrategic vulnerabilities in the Indian Ocean, but they should stop this policy of militarization, as Kondapalli was saying. That, you create islands in South China Sea, you do this, you do that. This muscular nationalist politics, which has become a hallmark of both China and India belatedly, must stop. Sensible people should take over. They should sit down, and the 2 greatest nations of the world, Asian giants, if this is going to be the Asian century, and these guys fight like medievals with clubs and swords and, spears, I mean, what is the message going to the rest of the world? That you Asians are brutes. Whereas you look at Europe, they are trying to make friends of neighbors. We are fighting in Asia. What the hell? How can you have an Asian century like this? And the last thing is, create economic interdependence. Don't try to boycott his goods. He should not try to boycott your goods. They should try to understand India's economic vulnerabilities, trade imbalance and all that. They should give more access to Indian products in their market. We give it access to their products. And I think create an Asian value chain. Asian value chain, which is the basis in economic interdependence, is the basis for bringing down political temperatures, where you all make money. You all make money, you live at peace. So that's the way forward, I think.
Thank you, Mr. Bhomik. We'll come for the last question to Professor Kondapalli. If you could sum up the entire discussion, and in your, because you are one of the most experts in the panel, if you could really say what are the basic points that India and China should look forward to in solving the problem in Asia, as Mr. Bhomik said. Professor Kondapalli.
Thank you, Professor Chatterjee. I think if we are talking about Asia, then Number one is we need to start afresh. Someone mentioned about the American role, which is a fact of life in Asia. And also the other powers. Now, we need to actually learn from China in this. In 1979, February, Deng Xiaoping went to the White House and he asked for three things from the US. Number one, he wanted the Americans to bless the China rise. So investments, stock markets, technology, FDI, SEZs, everything were cobbled up and China had risen. Of course, there are other factors, but this signaling is very important. Like Condoleezza Rice signaling in February 2005 in the Sophia University in Tokyo, the signaling there was China will rise because Americans fought the wars with the Soviets and both had depleted. So as Tom Christensen wrote in his book, US and China will be useful adversaries, useful to both of them in terms of market, in terms of, a host of other things. But that consensus has been broken in the last, say, 10 years and more intensely during Donald Trump's rule. So that is the first. The second is how to disintegrate the Soviet Union. So Deng Xiaoping and Carter and others, they have had these programs. And this was the time when the Soviets were occupying the Afghanistan, 79 to 89. So both fought together. They trained the Mujahideen, they trained Osama bin Laden, they had so many other events. So they disintegrated the Soviet Union together. Of course, there is the American role substantial in this. So they, for example, the CIA had set up signals intelligence facilities in Xinjiang to monitor the Soviets in Afghanistan. They have had NATO deliberations with the Chinese. So that was the second, which was completed. The third was, of course, stability on Taiwan. So that consensus was also not broken till recently because Trump started demanding reciprocity. Trump started looking at business tariffs and other aspects. So we need to learn from China in this, in the sense that it is not anti-Americanism politically, because China had displayed for the past 40 years, except during Trump administration, they had strategic stability relations with the US, except for a few flashpoints like the EP3 incident or USS Impeccable incident or others. You need to have these stable relations with the major powers. Chinese have displayed this. Chinese have risen because of this basic understanding. And so there is a lesson here for India as well on what are your objectives. China had displayed, we want, as Sripanna mentioned, well-off society. How do you build well-off society? Through these technology transfers, through these investments, through these special economic zones. Of course, it has to be factored in with the Indian demands, conditions, so on and so forth. So at the strategic level, they have made choices, and those choices led to China's rise. And we see China is the second largest economy today. Not just by the Americans, but Europeans, Japanese, Koreans, Taiwanese. The Taiwanese, ironically, they were helping China rise, and then now they are all saying, China is a threat. Some $280 billion pumped into the China market by the Taiwanese. Quite ironical, but that is the fact of life anyway. So what is important here is, what are your objectives? how do you perceive these objectives, national objectives?
Sir, we have to close.
If
so
there
you
is
will conclude.
if there is clarity on this, then everything will flow by professional studies rather than by any rumors or any other. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It was a very, very engrossing session of 2 hours and around 20 minutes, and keeping an audience of around 400 plus engrossed in the 3 sectors. And if I take YouTube and others, it would be kind of more. So thank you, all the speakers. I, on behalf of Adams University, Kolkata, Specially School of Liberal Arts and Culture Study, thank each one of the speakers, because from the audience reaction, we could not only that you were brilliant, but the audience was so enriched and they were so involved, and they provoked to a question so many times, and every one of them congratulated each of the speakers for their brilliance in the subject that they have taken. Thank you very much. Thank you. Good night.